So, ChatGPT and Bard, to a lesser extent, are both unbelievably overhyped. A lot of people seem to think these things will be able to replace humans at a lot of jobs, where I don't really agree with that. I think that these AIs do have very real applications and they are very impressive pieces of technology, but I don't think that they are going to take jobs that require thought anytime soon. And this experiment is partially meant to prove that because I have each of them playing one side of a chessboard. ChatGPT is white and Bard is black, and each one will give me their move, and then I will execute it if I can. More on that later, and then see which of them ends up coming out on top. Also, I should mention right here at the beginning, this is not GPT-4 that I am using here. This is GPT 3.5, the free version, because I don't want to pay $20 for GPT-4. I've heard GPT-4 is very good and is leagues better than GPT 3.5, but I played this with Bard's standard version versus ChatGPT's free version, so keep that in mind going forward. Now, I should mention that the version of what you're seeing now of each of the moves going through, this is heavily edited down. This actual game took over an hour and a half, and I'll explain why in a bit. But what you see, now that I've cut this down to about 2 minutes, is just the moves being executed. This does not include any of the time that it took me to convince these things to do legal moves, because it took a lot of wrangling to get that to happen, and you'll see why. Also, if you want to see the full chat logs with both of them, I have a Google Doc of that in the description, and those will help to illustrate how much I am cutting out here when I just show the moves, because every move here, especially later on, took a very long time to get it to do, because it just kept doing moves that didn't exist or weren't legal or something like that. So this game started out fairly normal. They both did decent opening moves, but as it got further into it, they weren't quite as good at coming up with moves mid-game, and I think it's because both of them had seen plenty of text about what the best opening moves in chess are, and I don't think they really had the best for the middle, especially Bard. Bard had a lot of trouble coming up with moves mid to late game. In fact, most of the moves it tried to do mid to late game were just moves that it had already done as openers. So, for example, there was this one knight it moved from G8 to F6 as an opening move, and it kept trying to do that same move, thinking it hadn't done it yet, and so I spent a lot of time just telling it over and over again, you already did that move, you can't do it again. And no matter how many times that happened, I'd go back to the next turn and suddenly it would try that move again, and which is why this took so long, because Bard in particular was very hard to get it to do moves that were A, legal, and B, weren't moves that it had already done. Like, by what already done, I mean, like, it would try to move pieces from a space that they weren't at because it didn't realize they'd been moved already, even though I gave it the full turn order in every prompt. ChatGPT sometimes had this problem, but I would say a lot less so than Bard did. Bard, I spent a lot longer trying to convince Bard to do legal moves than I did ChatGPT. ChatGPT also had a few times where this happened, but it didn't take nearly as long to pull it out of that, and it didn't happen nearly as many times as it did with Bard, and I'll get to why I think that was in a bit. So I think the biggest reason why I had so many issues like this with Bard more than ChatGPT was that ChatGPT seemed to have a much better memory of the conversation overall than Bard did. ChatGPT was a lot more likely to remember where a piece was 4 turns ago, for example. So if a piece had last been moved like more than 2 turns ago, Bard almost never knew where it was. In fact, I don't know if it ever knew where a piece like that was. ChatGPT would regularly, knowingly take pieces that had been moved more than 4 turns ago, which gave it a huge advantage because it knew it had a much better idea where stuff was and where it should hit, which is how it ended up winning because Bard kept moving stuff without ever doing it. Most of the time when Bard actually took a piece, it did so by accident, not by knowing it. And ChatGPT, I was kind of surprised. ChatGPT actually knew it had gotten checkmate, whereas Bard would never really notice stuff like that whenever it happens. But ChatGPT knew. There was one time where ChatGPT thought it had gotten checkmate, but it hadn't yet. But ChatGPT did actually know when the game ended, which Bard tried to forfeit multiple times. Like Bard knew it was losing for most of the game, but it didn't know exactly what was going on most of the time. I think this reason also ties into why Bard was so much more likely to try to do moves that it had already done. Because again, ChatGPT remembered that it had done those moves, whereas Bard didn't really, because it just didn't remember the conversation very well. Even though they're both advertised as being good at remembering the conversation, but I have noticed just in general use of them as well as this experiment that ChatGPT seems to have a better recollection of the entire conversation as a whole than Bard does. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, but that definitely gave ChatGPT a pretty major advantage here. And I think that's why ChatGPT won this game, because it, unlike Bard, was way more aware of the game, what was going on, and like what moves it had already made and what moves had happened recently. So it had a much better idea what Bard was doing, and it had a better idea what it was doing, which obviously in a strategy game helps a lot. And so this was really interesting. So like I said, you saw a minute of this game that was just the moves going through. This experiment took about an hour and a half, and most of that was me wrangling Bard into doing a legal move, because most of the time I spent on this was I would tell Bard what ChatGPT's last move was, and it would try to move that one knight I mentioned like almost every single time, and I have to tell it, no, you already did that, and I'd have to tell it tons of stuff about what was going on the board before it finally picked something that it actually could do. And so as a result, it rarely made a strategic choice. It usually just picked randomly from one of the moves that I told it was able to do, unfortunately. Obviously, neither of these AIs are designed to play games. Like, there's actual chess AIs that are way better at this. I just thought this would be a funny experiment to see which of these AIs that are not designed for this would fare better at it. And the answer appears to have been ChatGPT because of, like I mentioned, its better memory, and it, I think, may have also had slightly better training data for the middle of a game, as I mentioned, because even though Bard knew it was in the middle of a game, it kept trying to do opening moves. So, also, I should mention, Bard constantly tried to forfeit, like, a lot. There were several times where it just said, I want to forfeit, and I had to tell it, no, you're not doing that. Or ChatGPT never did that. ChatGPT never gave up, even when it was at a disadvantage in certain places. It still just kept fighting anyway, which I thought was kind of interesting. Also, throughout this whole experiment, I want to say that neither of these two AIs ever made like good moves. ChatGPT just made slightly better ones. Like, if I were on one of these sides of the chessboard, I would have won very quickly because I would have actually been able to think and like conceptualize what was going on the board, what I could do in the future. These are just regurgitating text. They've consumed text from tons of chess games, and they're just emulating it. They're not thinking about it. And that's an inherent problem with basically all AI right now. All AI right now, except for a few very specific instances, is just regurgitating whatever its training data was. And that's fine for some applications, but I don't think that AI will be the big job killer of a lot of things that people hype it up as anytime soon, until it is capable of real conceptual understanding like a human is, which I think we are a long way off from. Now, like, there are jobs that AI is taking, but I don't think it's going to be this kind of everything task manager that some people think it is. Some people really hype, especially ChatGPT, up as like being able to do literally anything anyone tells it to, which is just not true. As we've seen, ChatGPT can pass the bar exam, but it can't practice law. And it's because the bar exam is just information. It's just question, and it's just information in, information out. That's not what practicing law is. And the same goes for other things people have tried to use ChatGPT for. Like, as a programmer, as someone who's studying programming, I've seen people wonder about these AIs taking programming jobs. And I think they will increase the amount that a single employee can do, but I don't think these will be able to replace human engineers anytime soon, because they still don't conceptually think about it. So they're likely to do stupid things that a human might catch, but they wouldn't, for example. They can do simple things, and also they're decent at things that they can just pilfer from GitHub. But that's not real programming. That's just that's just like copying what you've seen. That's what these are good at, is regurgitation, which is not what you need to do in engineering or law or medicine or more complex jobs like that, if that makes sense. So yeah, thanks for watching. That was ChatGPT versus Bard at chess. And while ChatGPT won, I wouldn't really consider either of these AIs ready to be an everything app, as some people have tried to hype AI up to be. They're really impressive pieces of technology, and I think they do have a lot of very good real applications. But I think without a complete revolution to all of AI as a field, I don't think we're going to be seeing some more complex things being taken over by AI anytime soon. I think AI right now is good for things where it isn't a huge deal if it screws it up, because then you can just regenerate it and try again. So, for example, AI is fine at writing and art, because if it screws up either of those things, you can just go again, and it doesn't really matter. It matters a heck of a lot if it does something stupid while driving, for example. So driving has been a very hard thing to teach to AI, because it works fine most of the time, but in those few specific instances where something is not quite what its training data was, it doesn't really know how to react. And the same problem applies to these other things. They are only capable of imitating their training data, which can go a long way, but it doesn't go far enough to do what some of the affectionately nicknamed AI bros have kind of said these things will do in the future. So yeah, thanks for watching. I might do more experiments like this. Maybe I should have started with having these two things play checkers instead of chess. That might have been a bit faster, because again, this took an hour and a half to do, plus editing and all that. So maybe I should have done that instead. But yeah, this was a lot of fun, at least at first, before it got annoying. But it was still a really interesting experiment, and it was a good look, I think, into the differences in how these two very similar language models function. So yeah, thanks for watching. And if you have any ideas for stuff I should try with these, go ahead and post them in the comments. I thought about maybe forcing them to play a strategy game against me, like have both of them on one team arguing with each other what the best move to do is, and then have them decide on one and then and then have them do that move and then see what I do next. I might do that at some point, maybe not, we'll see. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.